I had been working at Spectratech for 5 years. 5 years of late nights, deadlines, and constant pressure. But I loved it. The hustle, the grind. It was all worth it because I was on track to be the youngest marketing executive in the company's history. Or so I thought. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I got the call. "Grace, can you come to my office? I need to discuss your future with the company," Sarah said, her voice laced with what I hoped was excitement. Sarah, my boss, was more like a mentor to me. She had promised me the promotion. She had reassured me time and time again that I was on the right path, the first step to the big leagues. Or so I thought. I walked into her office with a smile, my heart pounding in anticipation. "Grace, you've done exceptional work." Sarah began glancing at the papers in front of her, avoiding my eyes. "But we've decided to promote Alex instead." The room felt like it was closing in on me. Alex. Alex, the guy who barely understood the fundamentals of our campaigns. Alex, who'd been undermining my ideas, stealing my presentations, and pretending he was the one doing all the work. I had watched him get away with it for months, but this was the last straw. I stood there frozen as Sarah continued talking. I couldn't hear the words anymore. They were just noise. My mind raced. "Alex," I whispered, barely able to speak. She nodded as if it was nothing. "We feel he's the better choice. He's been more vocal lately." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers across her office. I wanted to tell her everything about Alex's sabotage, his constant belittling of my work, and the way he'd stolen my ideas. But I didn't, because somehow I knew that wouldn't matter. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't about who deserved it. This was about politics, favoritism, and power. And I had been played. "Grace." Sarah said, her voice suddenly soft. "I hope you understand. You've still got a bright future here." I felt like a fool, a damn fool. My mind started to spiral. I had given everything for this job, and now it was slipping through my fingers. But as I stood there, I realized this wasn't the end. Not for me. I wouldn't let it be. But first, I needed to process this betrayal. I needed time to think. I left her office with a heavy heart, knowing exactly what I had to do next. But I wouldn't act right away. No, I needed to be smart. I had been silent for too long, and that was about to change. The drive home was a blur. I could barely focus on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Alex, Sarah, the betrayal. It was all too much to process in one go. I parked my car in the garage and sat there for a few moments, the engine running as I stared at the reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Was this the same person who had been loyal? Who had poured her heart into her work? Who had believed in the company and Sarah in the dream? The woman in the mirror was angry. She was cold. She was done being played. I took a deep breath and turned off the engine. It was time to think. The next day at work was like any other. I walked into the office with my head held high, pretending everything was fine. But on the inside, I was already plotting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent the next few days gathering information. I paid closer attention to Alex, watching him interact with others, seeing how he handled projects. It didn't take long to realize how much he relied on my ideas. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and yet he kept climbing, riding the coattails of my hard work. The more I watched, the angrier I became. Every time he took credit for my efforts, every time he stood in front of the team pretending he was the one doing the work, I felt my blood boil. I had to do something about it. But I needed the perfect plan. That night, after hours, I snuck into the office, staying long after the others had gone home. The building was quiet, too quiet. But that was good. This was my chance. I opened my laptop and began drafting a marketing campaign, one that would blow Alex's out of the water. It wasn't just about surpassing his work. It was about proving once and for all who the real mastermind was. I knew the campaign could succeed, but it had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. I pulled up the campaign files from a previous project we had worked on Alex's project. the one where I had done all the heavy lifting while he basked in the spotlight. I combed through the details, finding the flaws, the areas he'd overlooked, the things he'd skipped over. I knew exactly what to tweak, what to add, and what to change. But that wasn't enough. If I wanted to make a statement, I had to expose Sarah's favoritism. I had to show everyone what had been happening behind the scenes. I needed proof, hard evidence of the way Sarah had ignored my work and handed Alex the promotion. I opened the company's internal communication system. I was meticulous as I drafted an anonymous email detailing everything: Alex's sabotage, Sarah's favoritism, and the dirty politics that had been playing out for months. I would leak it to the press, but I knew that it couldn't be too obvious. It had to look like an insider's tip, someone who had seen everything but remained in the shadows. I typed up the email, checking it twice before sending it out into the world. There was no turning back now. As I sat back in my chair, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The plan was in motion. It was messy. It was risky. But it was happening, and nothing could stop me. The next few days were filled with a mixture of tension and anticipation. I kept my composure at work, pretending to be the same Grace everyone had known, the one who always had a smile, who worked hard without making waves. But inside, I was a storm waiting to erupt. It didn't take long for the email I had sent to make its rounds. By Thursday afternoon, I received the first sign that my plan was starting to take effect. My phone buzzed with a notification from Tech News Daily. Breaking corporate sabotage in Silicon Valley, the untold story of favoritism and power, plays at Spectratech. The article was brief, but it was enough. It didn't name names yet, but it described the situation in enough detail to make everyone nervous. Whispers had already started to spread through the company. People were beginning to look at each other with suspicion. But then came the real shock. On Friday morning, Sarah called me into her office again. I had been dreading this moment, but I knew it was coming. Her face was grim, her eyes hard. "Grace." She started, her voice tight. "We need to talk about the email that's been circulating. You're behind it, aren't you?" I didn't flinch. I had already prepared myself for this moment. "Why are you accusing me of something without proof?" I asked, meeting her gaze. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. She exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. "Because I know how you work. You're smart, Grace. But this isn't the way to handle things. You think sabotaging Alex is going to fix everything." It took everything in me not to snap back at her. I wanted to scream that it wasn't about Alex, that it was about fairness, about how I had been treated. But I held it in. I had to keep playing this carefully. "No, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "It's not about Alex. It's about the truth. It's about how the company has been treating me and how you've allowed it." She looked away, a flicker of guilt in her eyes before she masked it again. "This needs to stop. If this continues, it's not just you who will suffer. Understand that." The threat hung in the air. I could feel it cold and suffocating. But there was no turning back now. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to be silenced. As I walked out of her office, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The confrontation had been uncomfortable, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I had my sights set on the final stage now. Later that day, I got a message from one of the marketing assistants, Mia. She had been working closely with Alex on the campaign that had won him the promotion. "I know you've been doing some digging, and I think you should know," the text read, "Alex's campaign. It's a mess. He's been taking credit for things he didn't do. If you want, I can help you expose it. I just need to be careful." Okay. Mia's message hit me like a jolt of electricity. Finally, someone was on my side. Finally, I had an ally. Mia had seen the cracks in Alex's work, and now we could expose him for the fraud he was. But I also knew this would add more fuel to the fire. If I was going to do this, I had to be even more meticulous. No one could know I was behind it. Not yet. By the time I left the office, I was more certain than ever that I would see this through. The next phase of my plan was underway, and I had a new ally in my corner. But I could feel the pressure mounting. The stakes were higher now, and one wrong move could destroy everything. The days that followed felt like a high-stakes game of chess. Every move had to be calculated precise. One wrong step and everything would come crashing down. I had my first real taste of power when Mia and I dug deeper into Alex's campaign. We found more cracks, more mistakes, and more evidence that he had been taking credit for my work without doing the heavy lifting. But what we found next was the final piece of the puzzle, the thing that would send everything into motion. Mia had access to some of the company's internal project files, and one night she sent me a document that I couldn't believe. It was a report detailing how Alex had altered a proposal that I had worked on without my consent and submitted it as his own. The worst part, it had been approved by Sarah herself. I sat in front of my laptop staring at the screen in disbelief. This was it. This was the smoking gun. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment I could finally expose the truth and take everything back. I knew I couldn't just send the report to the press. It had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. I needed to build a case to show how deep the corruption ran, how the very core of the company had been poisoned by favoritism and deceit. The press would need to see the full picture. So I began preparing. I gathered everything, emails, reports, project timelines, everything that showed how Alex had been cutting corners and how Sarah had been turning a blind eye. I made sure each piece of evidence was clear, each connection undeniable. But even with everything falling into place, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What if Sarah retaliated? What if she found a way to silence me? I had already been warned. I knew the stakes were high. Mia continued to help me quietly gathering intel, but as the pressure built, so did the tension between us. We were both playing with fire, and while I was starting to feel the adrenaline rush of being in control, Mia seemed more and more hesitant. I couldn't blame her. If we got caught, our careers could be ruined. The moment of truth came sooner than I expected. It was Monday morning when I saw Sarah and Alex talking in the hallway, laughing like they were old friends. It was a sickening sight seeing the two of them standing there, knowing exactly what they had done. It made something inside me snap. That afternoon, I finished compiling the evidence and sent it out. I made sure to send it to several key journalists using an encrypted email service to cover my tracks. There was no turning back now. The email was out there, the truth was exposed, and I could only wait. By the end of the day, I saw my first sign that the media was taking the bait. Tech News Daily published a follow-up article titled, "The Dark Side of Silicon Valley, A Tale of Favoritism, Sabotage, and Betrayal at Spectratech." The article outlined everything: Alex's manipulations, Sarah's role in the cover-up, and the systematic way they had kept me from succeeding. It was everything I had hoped for. And yet, as I read through it, a strange feeling washed over me. I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just a cold emptiness. I had won, but had I really? Had I really come out on top, or had I just become part of the same toxic system I was trying to destroy? I sat there in my office staring at my phone as notifications continued to flood in. My inbox was full of messages from colleagues, some congratulatory, some angry, some confused. But they were all watching. Everyone was watching. I couldn't help but feel exposed. Had I just set the company on fire, or had I just lit the fuse of my own destruction? The following days felt like I was living in a haze. The press coverage only grew, and as much as I had hoped it would bring justice, it also brought an undeniable storm. Sarah tried to control the damage, but it was too late. The cracks were showing, and the company couldn't hide them anymore. I kept waiting for the hammer to fall, for the moment when they would fire me, or worse, ruin my career for good. But instead, I got an unexpected message. It was from Sarah. "Grace, we need to meet." I was taken aback. After everything, after how she had treated me, why would she want to meet? What more could she possibly say to me? Still, I couldn't resist. I agreed to meet her in the same cafe where she had once sat across from me, telling me about all the promises she had made. The same cafe where everything had seemed so simple. That was before everything started to unravel. When I walked in, Sarah was already sitting at a corner table, her usual confidence replaced with a weary look. She looked tired, defeated. I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't the same powerful woman who had once called the shots. "Grace, I want to apologize," she said before I could say anything. "For everything." I blinked. Apologize, I didn't know how to react. "I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt you, but this is bigger than just us. It's bigger than Alex, bigger than the company. You know that, don't you?" I sat down across from her, still unsure where this conversation was headed. I nodded slowly, waiting for her to continue. I didn't want to give Alex the promotion, she confessed, her voice shaking. But there were pressures, things I couldn't control. I was cornered, Grace. The board had made it clear that I needed to do whatever it took to keep them happy, to keep the company afloat. And when you started to outperform Alex, when they started questioning the future of the department, I panicked. I made the wrong choice. I thought it would be easier to give him the promotion to avoid a bigger conflict. I could feel the weight of her words, but something inside me hardened. This was her apology, a confession, an excuse I didn't know which. But I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. "Why now, Sarah?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Why come to me now after everything that's happened?" She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. "Because I know what's coming. The board is furious. They're already questioning my leadership. Alex is starting to crack under the pressure, and the truth is, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I've been protecting myself for so long I didn't stop to think about how I was hurting you." I leaned back in my chair, digesting her words. This wasn't just about the promotion anymore. This was about a larger game, a larger force at play. Corporate politics, power struggles, and manipulation. And I had been a pawn in all of it. "I'm not here to make excuses," Grace Sarah said quietly. "But I need you to understand this wasn't personal. It was about survival." I stared at her silence, hanging between us like a thick fog. I wasn't sure what I expected from this meeting, but it certainly wasn't this. An apology was one thing, but redemption. That was a different story. "I get it," I said after a long pause, "but that doesn't change what you did. And it doesn't change what I have to do now." Her eyes widened, but I wasn't going to hold back anymore. I had been silent for too long. "I'm going to finish what I started," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm going to expose everything, every lie, every dirty move. And I'm not doing this for revenge, Sarah. I'm doing it because it's the only way to fix this. It's the only way to fix me." The look in Sarah's eyes shifted from guilt to fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but I stood up before she could speak. "I don't need your apology, Sarah. I don't need your approval. And I sure as hell don't need your sympathy." I turned and walked out of the cafe, feeling lighter with every step. The weight had shifted. I was no longer the one carrying the burden of betrayal. It was now Sarah. It was Alex. It was the company that had to carry that weight. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But even as I walked away, I knew there would be consequences. There always were. And now the real fight was about to begin. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of the scandal continued to spread, but now it wasn't just about Alex's incompetence or Sarah's favoritism. It was about a deeper rot that had infected the very core of Spectratech. People were starting to question the company's leadership. The board was on edge. The press kept digging, and things were moving faster than I could have imagined. But with every article published, every phone call I received from journalists, the weight of what I had done started to settle on my shoulders. I had exposed everything: Alex's lies, Sarah's manipulation, the corruption that had festered beneath the surface. But now that it was all out in the open, I couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? It wasn't the victory I thought it would be. As much as I wanted to feel triumphant, all I felt was a cold emptiness. The media had chewed up the story and spit it back out, but the company, my company, was left in turmoil. Employees were quitting. Projects were being halted. No one knew what the future held, and the atmosphere was tense. I wasn't just a witness to the destruction anymore. I had become a part of it. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Grace." A voice on the other end said. It was Mia. "I have something you need to hear. It's about Sarah." I sat up, suddenly alert. "What is it?" Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's planning to leave. She's already started looking for another job. She knows the board is coming for her. But there's more." I felt a chill run down my spine. "More? What do you mean?" "She's trying to cover her tracks. She's offering Alex a way out. She's going to make him the fall guy, Grace. She'll blame everything on him and try to salvage what's left of her reputation." My mind raced. This was exactly what I had feared. Sarah wasn't just trying to protect herself anymore. She was trying to save her skin at the expense of someone else, Alex. "She's using him?" I asked, barely able to believe it. "She's going to throw him under the bus." Mia was quiet for a moment. "That's what I'm hearing, and I think you need to act fast. If you wait too long, she'll have everything under control." I took a deep breath. "Thanks, Mia. I'll handle it from here." After the call ended, I sat there in silence. The pieces were falling into place, but now I had a new enemy to face. Sarah's desperation to cover her own mistakes was going to destroy Alex, and it wasn't something I could let happen. I didn't know how long I had, but I knew one thing: this was my last chance. If I wanted to make sure Alex didn't pay for Sarah's crimes, I had to act quickly. I couldn't afford to wait, not when the stakes were this high. I spent the next few days gathering more information, emails, recordings, anything that could show the truth of what Sarah had done to Alex. I couldn't just let him become the scapegoat. He might have been complicit, but he wasn't the mastermind behind this mess. And so with everything I had, I prepared my final move. I contacted one last journalist, one who had been following the story closely. It was time to make sure Sarah's plan backfired. I sent them everything I had proof of her betrayal, her attempt to sacrifice Alex, and her desperate scramble to keep her position. This wasn't just about exposing Sarah anymore. It was about ensuring that justice was served for everyone. I pressed send and sat back, my heart racing. There was no going back now. The days following my final move were filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I could feel the tension building within the walls of SpectraTech, as if the company itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And something was about to. The first sign came when Sarah called me into her office yet again. I knew this was it. She had found out, or at least she was getting closer to finding out who had exposed everything. I had prepared myself for this moment, but as I walked into her office, my pulse quickened. "Grace, sit down." Sarah said, her voice cold and clipped. She was trying to maintain control, but the cracks in her composure were evident. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't answer right away, simply sitting down and meeting her eyes. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two people who had been allies, mentors even, and now enemies each with a different version of the truth. "You think sending that email was going to change everything?" Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You've made things worse, Grace, for everyone." I wasn't fazed. I had heard it all before, the excuses, the denials, the blaming. "You didn't think I had a choice, did you?" "You gave me no choice, Sarah." I replied, my voice low but firm. "You and Alex have been playing games with people's lives, with my life. I couldn't sit back and let you get away with it." Her face darkened. "This is bigger than you, Grace. Do you really think one email is going to change the way this company works? The board is already moving against me, and you're making it worse for yourself." I stood up, walking to the window, my back to her. The city outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant now. "Maybe I am making it worse," I said softly, my reflection in the glass showing a woman I didn't quite recognize. "But if I don't do something now, nothing will change. It'll keep going like this with people like you making decisions that ruin lives. It's not just about me anymore, Sarah. It's about everyone you've stepped on to get to where you are." I could feel her eyes boring into my back, but I didn't turn around. Not yet. "You're playing a dangerous game, Grace," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. "You might think you've won, but there are consequences to everything." I took a deep breath. This was it. The final confrontation. "I'm not afraid of consequences, Sarah. I'm afraid of living with the regret of never having done something about it." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing shallow and uneven as she struggled to hold on to whatever power she had left. "You'll regret this, Grace. I promise you," Sarah said finally, her voice full of venom. "You're playing with fire and it will burn you." I walked out of her office without a word, knowing that this was the beginning of the end. The board was already involved and the pressure was mounting. It wouldn't be long before the fallout hit its peak. But as I left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. The moment I had been waiting for was here. Everything I had done, the lies I had uncovered, the truth I had exposed, the chaos I had unleashed, was leading to this moment. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to back down now. By the time the next week rolled around, the company was in full-blown crisis mode. Spectratech stock had dropped, employees were on edge, and the board was frantically trying to regain control. My email, the one that had exposed everything, had gone viral. The press had picked it up, and now everyone from TechCrunch to the Wall Street Journal was asking questions. I wasn't sure whether to feel victorious or terrified. It wasn't long before I received a summons from the board. They wanted to meet with me. It felt like an inevitable step, a confrontation with the people who had kept the truth hidden for so long. I knew this was the moment when everything would come to a head. The question was, would I walk out of that room victorious, or would I be crushed under the weight of everything I had exposed? When I walked into the boardroom, I could feel the tension in the air. The room was filled with some of the most powerful people in the company, but there was no power in their eyes. They looked exhausted, broken, like they knew they were on the verge of losing everything. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her face pale and drawn. Alex was there too, looking nervous, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. "Grace, the head of the board," Mr. Thompson said, his voice cold. "We've been reviewing the situation, and we've come to a conclusion." I took a deep breath, standing tall in front of them. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had already lost everything that mattered, but now I had control. It was time to take it. "You have no idea how badly you've damaged this company, do you?" Mr. Thompson continued. "This scandal is not just about the promotion, it's about trust, Grace. You've broken that trust with everyone in this room." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "No, Mr. Thompson. What I've done is expose the truth. What you've done is cover it up. You've all been complicit in this turning a blind eye while people like Sarah and Alex trampled on the integrity of this company." There was a long silence. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, but she didn't speak. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. "I'm not here to apologize," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not here to make nice. I'm here because I did what no one else had the guts to do. I exposed the rot that was poisoning this company. I showed everyone what was really going on." Mr. Thompson's face darkened. "And you think that makes you a hero," he spat. "You think this is going to fix everything." "I don't know if it will fix everything," I said, "but it's the only way forward. You can either own up to the truth or you can keep pretending like nothing's wrong. But you can't keep hiding forever." There was another long silence, and I could tell they were processing what I had said. I wasn't sure if they had expected me to beg for forgiveness or plead for a second chance, but that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. "I've made my decision," I said, breaking the silence. "I'm not staying here. I've made it clear to the press that I have no interest in working for a company that values secrecy over integrity." Mr. Thompson looked at me, his gaze hardening. "You're making a mistake. We can still fix this." I shook my head. "I don't think so. This company has been broken for a long time, and no one in this room is strong enough to fix it." I turned and walked out of the boardroom, knowing that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. The days after the board meeting passed in a blur, but the tension in the air only grew heavier. Spectratech was in chaos. The press had torn into us, and every time I opened my email, I was bombarded with messages from former colleagues, journalists, and even people I didn't know, all offering opinions and warnings. Some congratulated me for standing up. Others warned me about the fallout I hadn't yet seen coming. But for all the noise and chaos I felt, calm. Maybe it was the clarity of knowing I had done the right thing. Or maybe it was the fact that I had finally broken free from the fear and manipulation that had haunted me for so long. But I wasn't naive. I knew the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. It came on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my desk sorting through some papers when I got the call from Mia. "Grace, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with urgency. I immediately opened my inbox. The subject line was simple but chilling, urgent. Sarah's last move. My hands trembled as I clicked the email open. Inside, Mia had attached a series of screenshots. They were from a private conversation between Sarah and a few members of the board, and they weren't pretty. In the messages, Sarah was offering Alex a deal, a way to take the fall for everything. She had promised him that if he took the blame for the entire scandal, he would be given a substantial severance package and a chance to walk away with his reputation somewhat intact. Sarah, in turn, would keep her position as CEO, and the board would fall in line. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected Sarah would try to throw Alex under the bus, but seeing the evidence laid out in front of me was a different kind of shock. I knew what I had to do. I quickly drafted an email to the journalists I had been in contact with, attaching the screenshots and explaining how Sarah had orchestrated this entire plan. I couldn't let Alex bear the weight of her mistakes, not after everything he had already endured. As soon as I hit send, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Alex. "I know what you've done," it said. "You've sent the screenshots. You've exposed her." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I just stared at the message, wondering where this would all go. The news hit within hours. Tech News Daily broke the story wide open, with the Wall Street Journal picking it up shortly after. Sarah's last move was exposed to the world, how she had used Alex as a pawn in her game of survival, how she had manipulated him into taking the fall for everything she had done. By the time I left the office that evening, the world had changed. Sarah was being investigated by the board, her position as CEO under threat. The company was scrambling to salvage its reputation, and Alex, he was gone. But as the media frenzy grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something even darker, lurking in the aftermath. The board members had promised me justice, but I knew better than to trust them. The real fight, the one that would determine who would truly pay for all of this, had yet to begin. I couldn't afford to relax, not yet. I had exposed the truth, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The board's next move was still unknown, and if they thought they could get away with sweeping everything under the rug again, they were gravely mistaken. I wasn't going to let that happen. I left the office with a sense of resolve, but also with a warning in the back of my mind: no one was ever as free as they seemed. It wasn't long after Sarah's final betrayal was exposed that the pressure inside Spectratech reached a breaking point. The board was scrambling, and the company's public relations team was working overtime to contain the fallout. Investors were pulling out, employees were resigning, and the company's once solid foundation was crumbling under the weight of its own lies. But amid all of this chaos, there was one question I couldn't shake. What now? I had exposed the truth, but what good had it done? Sarah's career was hanging by a thread, but she wasn't the only one who had played a part in this mess. The board, the people who had turned a blind eye to everything, were just as guilty. The company was broken, and no matter how much damage control they tried to do, it was too late. That's when I decided to take one final step. It started with a phone call from Mia. She had been a quiet ally throughout this entire process, and I could sense that she was struggling with the weight of what had happened. She had helped me gather information, and now I needed her help more than ever. "We have to go public with everything," I said, my voice resolute. It's not just about Sarah anymore. It's about the people who allowed this to happen. It's about the board. They all need to be held accountable. Mia hesitated. Grace, are you sure I mean exposing everything? It's going to destroy everyone? And what about you? What happens to your future? I had thought about that long and hard. Exposing the full extent of the corruption wasn't just a matter of making things right. It meant putting my own career on the line. The people I had worked with for years would see me as a traitor, a whistleblower, someone who had torn apart everything we had built. But I wasn't about to let them off the hook, not when the stakes were so high. I'm not afraid of the consequences anymore, I said, my voice steady. I've already lost everything that mattered to me, but I won't let them keep getting away with it. Mia finally agreed, and together we began preparing everything. We'd already released the initial evidence, but now we would go deeper. We would show the emails, the meetings, the promises made behind closed doors, the full scope of Sarah's manipulation and the board's complicity. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The backlash would be brutal. But I couldn't stop now. Not when the truth was within my grasp. We spent the next few days finalizing everything, working late into the night to make sure we had all the documentation, all the proof we needed to take down, not just Sarah, but the system that had allowed her to thrive. We had a deadline, and once we hit send, there would be no turning back. On a Friday afternoon as the sun began to set, I hit send on the final email. I had sent everything, the documents, the evidence, the timeline of events to the press. The story would break on Monday morning, and I knew that by then the world would know the truth. The next few days were a blur of nervous anticipation. I spent my time reflecting on everything that had happened, everything I had lost, and everything I had gained. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages from Mia, from former colleagues, from journalists who had already started reaching out for comments. And then on Monday morning, the story broke. The headline read, "Spectratech's toxic culture exposed, CEO, board members complicit in years of corruption and favoritism." The article detailed everything: Sarah's rise to power, her manipulation of the board, her exploitation of employees, and the way she had been covering up the truth for years. It showed how the company had been built on lies with only a few people left standing to protect their own interests. The reaction was swift. The board was forced to step down, with many of them publicly apologizing for their role in allowing the corruption to continue. Sarah was officially removed as CEO, and the company entered a period of restructuring. But as the dust began to settle, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of emptiness. I had won, but at what cost? The company was in ruins, and while the people responsible had been held accountable, I was left to pick up the pieces. I had exposed the truth, but it had come at the expense of everything I had once known. As I walked out of the office for the last time, I knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning of a new chapter. I had fought for justice, and I had won. But the road ahead would be long, and I would have to build something new from the ashes of Spectratech. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The aftermath of the Spectratech scandal was a whirlwind. The company was officially in the process of restructuring, and its reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The board members who had allowed the corruption to thrive were gone, replaced by a new team who promised change. Sarah, of course, had been removed, though I doubted that anyone could ever truly erase her influence on the company. But amidst the chaos, I found myself at a crossroads. The world had been watching, and now that the dust had settled, I was left with the consequences of my actions. I had taken down Spectratech's rotten core, but now I had to figure out where I fit in this new world. I spent the next few weeks in limbo, fielding offers from various companies and even receiving job offers that I couldn't take seriously. They all wanted to hire the woman who had exposed Spectratech's corruption, but none of them seemed to understand what I really wanted. I didn't want to go back into another corporate environment. Not yet. Not when the scars of my last experience were still fresh. I had done my part, taken down a giant, but what now? One evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, an idea began to form. I had always wanted to build something of my own, something that wasn't corrupted by politics, by power, plays, by lies. I had the skills, the experience, and the drive to do something different. That night, I made a decision. I would start my own company. It wouldn't be easy. Starting from scratch after everything I had been through felt like an insurmountable challenge. But there was one thing I knew for certain: I didn't want to be another cog in the machine. I wanted to build something that could thrive without the toxic influence that had plagued my career, a company built on honesty, integrity, and trust. I started by reaching out to the people who had supported me through the SpectraTech ordeal, Mia, former colleagues who had left the company, and even a few journalists who had followed the story closely. They all offered their help, their expertise, and their trust. Together, we formed a small but passionate team. The first few months were difficult. There were moments when I doubted my decision, when I wondered if it would have been easier to just take one of the job offers and return to the comfort of a regular paycheck. But each time I faced those doubts, I remembered why I was doing this in the first place. I wasn't doing this for the money. I wasn't doing this for fame. I was doing this because I believed in something better. I believed that businesses could be built on a foundation of truth, that success didn't have to come at the cost of integrity. The road to building something new wasn't without its challenges, but with every setback, I felt myself growing stronger. With each small victory, I knew I was on the right path. As the months passed, my company began to gain traction. We started building a reputation for being honest and transparent, for creating solutions that actually worked, not just for the people at the top, but for everyone. Slowly but surely, we began to make a name for ourselves in the industry. And then one day, out of the blue, I received a phone call. It was from one of the board members from SpectraTech, the same board that had tried to silence me, that had tried to cover up the truth. Grace, the voice on the other end, said, "We want to talk to you." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "What about," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been following your progress, and we want you back. We want to offer you a position at SpectraTech." I didn't respond immediately. My first instinct was to hang up the phone, to reject them outright. But as I sat there, I realized something. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that room years ago. I had changed. And this was my opportunity to show them that the old way of doing business was dead. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice firm. "I've built something better. I'm done with companies like yours." I hung up the phone, a small smile creeping onto my face. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with my decision. I had taken everything I had been through and used it to create something new, something real. The future was still uncertain, but as I looked at the small team I had built, as I watched the company grow, I knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. I was free. Months passed, and the world continued to spin, but everything felt different. My company, our company, had grown stronger with every passing day. What had started as a small, passionate team was now becoming a legitimate player in the industry. We were no longer a fledgling startup. We were a brand that stood for something greater than just profits. I had built something from the ground up, and though it hadn't been easy, every challenge felt like a victory in its own right. We had clients who trusted us, employees who believed in our mission, and most importantly, we had our integrity. We weren't just another business looking to make a quick buck. We were here to change the way things were done. But even as my company gained momentum, I knew that SpectraTech's shadow still loomed large over my past. It was impossible to forget what I had gone through, and sometimes I still found myself haunted by the questions of whether I could have done things differently. Was there another way I could have exposed the truth? Another path that didn't require so much destruction. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office going over some reports when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then picked it up. Grace. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but calm. "This is Eric Thompson from SpectraTech." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard from anyone at SpectraTech in months. not since I had walked away for good. I'm sure you're surprised to hear from me, Eric continued, but I wanted to reach out and speak to you about something important. I leaned back in my chair, a mix of curiosity and caution running through my veins. What could you possibly want? I asked, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. I know we've had our differences, Eric said, his tone measured, but I wanted to personally apologize. What happened at Spectratech, the way things unfolded, it was wrong. And I want you to know that I regret how it all went down. We didn't handle it well, and we let the company fall into the hands of people who didn't care about what was right. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I didn't know how to respond to this. Eric had been one of the board members who had stood by and watched as Sarah and the others destroyed everything I had worked for. But hearing the regret in his voice, the sincerity made me pause. I appreciate the apology, I said finally, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what you allowed to happen. There was silence on the other end, and I could almost feel Eric's hesitation. I know, and I don't expect it to, but I want you to know that Spectratech is changing. We're rebuilding from the ground up, and we're taking full responsibility for our actions. And Grace, we want to offer you a chance to help us. I raised an eyebrow, unsure if I had heard him correctly. Help you after everything. Yes, Eric said. We need someone like you. Someone who isn't afraid to speak the truth. Someone who can guide us through this transition. We can't do it alone. And we know that if we don't bring someone like you on board, we'll never truly be able to change. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, after everything I had fought for, they were asking me to come back to work with the same people who had allowed corruption to run rampant. No, I said the word coming out with a finality I hadn't expected. I've built something better, something that's not tainted by everything you allowed to happen. I'm not coming back, Eric. Not to Spectratech. Not to that world. There was a long pause on the other end. I understand, Eric finally said. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to think about it. I won't take up any more of your time. Goodbye, Eric, I said firmly before hanging up the phone. I sat there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling on me. It wasn't about the money or the position or even the company's offer. It was about something deeper. I had walked away from Spectratech for a reason. I had left that world behind, and no amount of apologies or offers could change that. The truth was, I was where I was meant to be. My company wasn't just a job to me, it was a testament to everything I had learned, everything I had fought for. It was my legacy. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Weeks passed, and the chaos of Spectratech slowly faded from the headlines. The media moved on to the next big story, but the impact of what had happened lingered in the industry. I often caught myself thinking about how far I had come from a young marketing executive, betrayed and undermined, to someone who had exposed corruption, survived the fallout, and built something entirely new from scratch. One evening, I sat on my balcony looking out over the city lights of San Francisco. The air was crisp, and the hum of traffic below felt distant, almost peaceful. I had a rare moment to reflect on everything, the betrayals, the losses, the victories, and the lessons. It hadn't been easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, haunted by doubts and what-ifs. But every struggle had taught me something invaluable about resilience, integrity, and the power of standing up for yourself. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old emails from the time before everything fell apart. Some were reminders of deadlines, some congratulatory messages from mentors I had once trusted, and some were subtle jabs from colleagues who had envied my work. I smiled faintly. Those messages no longer had power over me. I had learned how to take control of my own narrative. Mia had been right there throughout the journey. I turned to her, sending a quick message. "Coffee tomorrow, I think we deserve a moment to breathe," I typed. Her reply was almost instant. "Absolutely. Let's celebrate surviving the storm and everything we built." It struck me then, the real victory wasn't the scandal, the press coverage, or even the downfall of Sarah and the board. The real victory was reclaiming my own life, taking back control of my choices, my career, and my principles. I hadn't just survived, I had grown. And as the night stretched on, I realized something profound. Revenge had started this journey, yes, but it wasn't revenge that mattered in the end. It was the courage to act, the willingness to confront injustice, and the determination to build something better after the destruction. That was what truly defined me. I leaned back, letting the city lights wash over me, and felt a deep sense of peace. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was free, and I was in charge of what came next. For the first time in years, I could look forward with clarity and with hope. It had been a year since the storm that had shaken SpectraTech, and the changes in my life were as vast as the company's collapse. My new company was thriving, and I had learned something every day about leadership, about resilience, and most importantly, about the importance of doing business the right way. I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, sipping my coffee, when I received a message that would change everything. It was an email from an old contact, a former colleague who had worked with me during the early days at SpectraTech. The subject line simply read, "The future of tech, a new era." I opened it expecting another round of business pitches or industry gossip, but what I read made my stomach drop. The email outlined a new initiative backed by several former members of the SpectraTech board, the very people who had tried to bury the truth. They were working on a new startup one that was positioned to dominate the tech industry, and they wanted me to be part of it. They believed my experience, my exposure of SpectraTech's corruption, made me the perfect candidate to lead their marketing efforts. The offer was tempting. The project sounded revolutionary, the potential was massive, and the compensation was beyond anything I could have imagined. For a moment, I felt the pull of familiarity, the allure of working with some of the most powerful people in the industry, again, the chance to be a part of something groundbreaking. But then the memories flooded in. The betrayal, the manipulation, the corporate games. I had walked away from that world for a reason, and no amount of money or prestige could make me forget why. I thought about the people I had met along the way, the team that had helped me build something from nothing, the people who shared my vision of a business rooted in honesty and integrity. They were the ones who had stuck by me, the ones who had believed in something better. And it was for them, for all of us, that I had chosen this path. I took a deep breath and typed a response. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested. I've already found where I belong." It was a simple reply, but it felt like the final piece of my personal journey. I wasn't tempted by the old world anymore. I wasn't looking for validation from those who had once held the power. I had everything I needed in front of me. My company was a reflection of my values, and that was more than enough. I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and looked out the window. The future was bright. I had faced the darkness of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than I had ever been. As the sun set over the horizon, I realized that I had finally found peace, not just with the world, but with myself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of the challenges it would bring. I was ready for whatever came next. I had taken control of my own destiny, and that was the most powerful thing I could ever do. Months turned into a year, and the company continued to grow, thriving in a way I hadn't even dreamed of when we first started. The road wasn't always smooth. There were tough decisions to be made, unexpected challenges, and moments of doubt. But every step forward felt earned, and every hurdle we overcame solidified my belief in the path I had chosen. The team I had built was more than just a group of employees. They were a family, people who shared the same values, who believed in something bigger than just making money. Together, we were building a culture based on honesty, integrity, and hard work. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, and that's what kept us going. One late evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing the latest quarter's projections, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. "Grace, we've been offered a huge opportunity. It's time to make some big moves." I leaned back in my chair, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. We had come a long way from the chaos of SpectraTech. This was exactly what we had been working toward, expanding, growing, breaking into new markets, and continuing to build something that could truly change the way business was done. I had always told myself that when the time came, I would be ready for the next big step. And now the time had arrived. The opportunity Mia was referring to was a partnership with a major international brand. It was the kind of deal that could catapult us into the global market, opening doors to new clients, new resources, and the kind of recognition we had worked so hard for. I took a deep breath and made the call. Mia, let's do it. Let's take this to the next level. The agreement was finalized in record time, and just like that, we were poised for a new chapter. We started working on the expansion planning for the future and thinking bigger than we ever had before. But even as I embraced this new phase, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forever tied to the lessons I had learned through the destruction of Spectratech. It had shaped me, molded me, and given me the resilience I needed to keep going. I hadn't just built a business, I had built a vision for what the future of corporate culture could look like. A vision of transparency ethics and purpose-driven work. The journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be risks, but I knew I had the strength and the team to handle whatever came next. We were ready for anything. As the sun set on the horizon, I looked out over the city again, just like I had on that first night after everything had fallen apart. Only now, the city felt different. It felt full of possibilities, full of hope. I had built this from the ground up, and I was proud of it. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. A year had passed since the deal with the international brand, and what a year it had been. Our company had grown exponentially, expanding into new markets and building a reputation for being a disruptor in the industry. I looked back at the person I had been when I started this journey, someone lost, betrayed, and scrambling for control, and marveled at how much I had changed. The road hadn't been without its challenges. There were moments when I questioned everything. The weight of responsibility, the constant pressure to outperform the competition, the long nights that blurred into one another, it all weighed heavily on me. But through it all, I had learned the true meaning of leadership. It wasn't about being the smartest or the most talented. It was about being consistent, staying true to your values, and knowing when to listen to others. The company wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was mine. And the lessons I had learned from my time at Spectratech, the betrayal, the manipulation, the corruption had shaped every decision I made. I wasn't just leading a company, I was building a culture. And that culture was everything. One evening, I sat at my desk reviewing the latest financial reports when Mia walked in. She had been by my side through it all, through the darkest moments of Spectratech, through the sleepless nights, and through the early, difficult days of building our company. "Grace," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "you won't believe the offer we just got." I looked up from my desk, intrigued. "What offer?" Mia's eyes sparkled. "A buyout offer from one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. They want to acquire us." I blinked in surprise. This was a huge step, bigger than anything I had imagined when we first started. I had built this company with the goal of making it something sustainable, something that could thrive without the toxic environment that had plagued my past. But now an opportunity for a massive exit was on the table. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. The offer was enticing. The capital we would receive could fuel our next phase of growth, expand our reach, and allow us to scale in ways we never could on our own. It would bring the kind of stability that many companies only dreamed of. But something inside me hesitated. For years, I had fought to build something that wasn't driven by power or money. I had built this company on integrity, on the belief that businesses could do well while doing good. Could I really sell that for the promise of more money, more influence, more power? I didn't have an answer right away. I needed time to think. The next few days were filled with deep reflection as I weighed the pros and cons. The buyout would secure the future of the company, But at what cost would we lose the soul of what we had built? Would we become just another company chasing the next big deal, losing sight of the values that had made us unique? On the 5th day, I gathered the team in our conference room. We'd been through so much together, and I knew that whatever decision I made would impact all of us. As I looked around the room, I realized that I wasn't alone in this. We were all in it together, and the future wasn't just mine to decide it was ours. I've thought long and hard about the offer. I began my voice steady, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But we've built something special here, something real. We've created a culture that stands for something more than just profits. It's about making a difference, doing the right thing, and staying true to who we are. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. We don't need to sell out to scale. We can continue to grow, continue to make an impact, and do it on our terms. The future is ours to shape, and I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what truly matters. The room was silent for a moment, and then Mia spoke up, her voice full of agreement. I'm with you, Grace. We're not just in it for the money, we're in it for something bigger. The rest of the team nodded, their faces filled with determination and belief. And just like that, we made the decision. We turned down the buyout offer and chose to continue building on our own terms. It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. We had come full circle. From the betrayal and the collapse of Spectratech to the rebirth of something new, we had created a company that wasn't just about business, it was about integrity, about purpose, about making a difference. And as I looked around the room at the people who had helped me get here, I knew we had done it the right way. The future was uncertain, but that's what made it exciting. We didn't need to sell our soul to succeed. We just needed to stay true to our vision, keep pushing forward, and trust that the world would eventually recognize what we were building. And so the journey continued. It's easy to forget how much we've changed when everything around us moves so fast. The days blur into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. As I sat in my office one evening staring at the latest market reports, I realized something profound. The world hadn't stopped for me. The decision to turn down the buyout offer had been a hard one, but now, as I reflected on where we were, how far we had come, it felt like the right one. My team and I had faced adversity at every turn, but we had built something that was sustainable. Something that was growing on its own terms, not because of any flashy exit deal or corporate takeover. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I thought back to when I first left Spectratech. At the time, I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that toxic environment any longer. I was broken, disillusioned, and unsure of what the future held. But I had to trust in the process. I had to trust that there was something better out there for me, something that would make me whole again. And here I was, years later, leading a company that was thriving. It hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been incredibly hard. But every challenge had shaped me, had molded me into a leader who valued integrity above all else. Every decision I made had been guided by the lessons I learned from the darkest days of Spectratech. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. I'd be lying if I said I never second-guessed myself. The world of business was unforgiving, and the pressure to succeed weighed heavily on my shoulders. Sometimes the path I had chosen seemed like the road less traveled, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. But then I'd look around at my team, at the people who had chosen to join me in this journey. People who believed in the vision we had created, who had invested their time, their energy, and their trust in this company. And I realized that despite the setbacks and the moments of doubt, I had done something right. I had built a community, a company that cared about more than just profit. I was proud of what we had accomplished. But more than that, I was proud of how we had done it. We hadn't compromised our values. We hadn't sold out for success. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles to face. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready. I had learned to trust my instincts, to trust the team I had built, and to trust the vision that had guided me this far. I stood up from my desk, walking over to the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. It felt like a moment of quiet reflection, a moment to appreciate how far I had come. As I stood there looking out at the world, I knew that the road less traveled was the one that had led me to where I was today. And no matter what the future held, I would keep walking that road. The road of integrity, of purpose, of doing business the right way. For me, that was enough. Years passed, and as our company continued to thrive, I found myself at a crossroads once again. We had achieved things I never thought possible, but now there was a question that lingered in my mind. What was the legacy I wanted to leave behind? As the business grew, so did the opportunities. I was often invited to speak at conferences to share my story and to mentor young entrepreneurs who were looking to make their mark in the world. It was an honor, but it was also a reminder of just how far I had come. From the girl who had been betrayed, humiliated, and discarded, to the woman who had built something from the ground up, something that was making a real impact. But with every success came new challenges. As much as I wanted to keep pushing the boundaries, there were moments when I wondered if I was still on the right path. Was I still staying true to my values? Or had I become just another business leader chasing success at any cost? I began to realize that it wasn't about achieving more or growing bigger. It was about ensuring that the company I had built would remain true to its core principles, even when I wasn't around. The legacy I wanted to leave behind wasn't just a successful business, it was a culture of integrity, a company that would outlive me, one that would continue to make a difference long after I was gone. That's when I started thinking about the next chapter. I knew that my role was evolving. I couldn't stay at the helm forever. The team I had surrounded myself with was more than capable of leading the company to even greater heights. It was time for me to step back to allow others to take the reins and to focus on the bigger picture. My vision had always been about creating something that didn't rely solely on me. I wanted a company that would stand on its own, that would thrive because of the values we had instilled in it, not because of my name or my presence. So I began to mentor the next generation of leaders within my company. I didn't just teach them about business strategy or marketing tactics. I taught them about the importance of doing things the right way. I shared the lessons I had learned through the years, the mistakes I had made, the people I had trusted, and the times I had doubted myself. I wanted them to understand that success wasn't just about making money. It was about making an impact, about creating something that would last, something that would change the world. The transition wasn't easy. Letting go of control, stepping away from the day-to-day operations, was harder than I had anticipated. But as I watched the team step up, as I saw them carry the torch forward, I knew I had made the right decision. One day, as I sat in my office reflecting on the journey I had taken, I received a call from an old friend, someone who had been with me from the very beginning. They asked how I was doing, and I couldn't help but laugh. "I'm doing great," I said, my voice filled with satisfaction. "I built something real, and now I get to watch it grow." The legacy we leave behind isn't just about what we achieve, it's about the lives we touch, the people we inspire, and the change we create. They agreed, and in that moment I realized that I had finally come full circle. I had built something that was bigger than myself, something that would continue to make a difference even long after I was gone. As I looked out the window one last time, watching the city bustle below, I knew that the future was in good hands. The legacy I had built wasn't just about success, it was about integrity, about doing things the right way, and about inspiring others to do the same. And that was enough for me. Years had passed, and the foundation I had built was stronger than ever. The company was thriving, our culture of integrity had set us apart from others in the industry, and we were known not just for our success, but for the way we did business. As I sat in my office watching the sunset over the city, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the rise from the ashes, the decisions, the sacrifices, it had all led me here. But there was one last thing I had to do. In all the years I had spent building this company, one thing had always nagged at me, Sarah. The woman who had once been my mentor, the woman whose betrayal had set everything in motion. I had forgiven her in my heart, but something told me that to truly move on, I needed to make one final symbolic gesture. I didn't know where Sarah was now. The press had long since moved on, and SpectraTech had faded into the background. But I knew that in my own heart, the last chapter of my story had not been written. To close this chapter, I needed to face her one final time. Not as the woman she had manipulated, but as the woman I had become. I reached for my phone and dialed the number I had held onto for years, the number that had once belonged to Sarah. I hadn't dialed it since the day I had walked out of SpectraTech for the last time. It rang twice before she picked up. Grace. Her voice was hesitant, almost as if she didn't expect to hear from me. I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. I took a deep breath. I'm calling because I need closure. Not for you, for me. There was a long pause. I could hear the uncertainty in her voice when she spoke again. Closure. After everything. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I've spent too many years carrying the weight of what happened between us. I've built a new life, a new company, and I've learned how to forgive. But I need to speak to you just one last time. Grace, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. You were right to walk away. I betrayed you in ways that I can never make up for. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't about getting an apology. This wasn't about seeking revenge. It was about releasing the final remnants of resentment I'd been holding on to for far too long. I've forgiven you, I said quietly. But I needed you to hear that. To hear that I've moved on, that I've built something that doesn't rely on the lies and manipulation of the past. I found peace, and I needed you to know that. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't interrupt me. I could tell she was listening, really listening in a way she never had before. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said softly, but I'm glad you found it. I never thought you would after everything that happened. I felt the weight of those words. It wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement of the damage done and of the growth that had occurred on both sides. I'm not doing this to change anything, I said, my voice firm. I'm doing this because I needed to. It's my final step in moving forward. There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. I understand, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Grace. You've done something I couldn't. I hope you find all the success and happiness you deserve. I already have, I replied softly. And with that, I hung up. The silence in the room felt different now. It wasn't the silence of resentment or unfinished business. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that comes when you finally let go of the past and embrace the present. I sat back in my chair and looked out at the city once more. The future was wide open. I had walked through the fire, emerged stronger, and had created something meaningful. And now I was free. It had been years since I made the decision to build something new, to walk away from the past and everything SpectraTech represented. The company had grown beyond what I had ever imagined, and I had grown with it. I had faced so many challenges, made so many hard decisions, and yet I was still standing. We were still standing. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had taught me everything I needed to know about resilience, about leadership, and about myself. The mistakes I had made, the people I had trusted, the battles I fought, everything had shaped me into the person I had become. And now I was ready for something different, something more. The day came when I stood in front of my team, the same group of people who had been with me from the very beginning. They were no longer just employees. They were my partners, my family. Together we had built something incredible, and now it was time for me to pass the torch. I've thought long and hard about this. I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. When I started this company, I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. I wanted to build something real, something that mattered. We've done that and so much more. We've created a company that stands for integrity, that stands for doing the right thing no matter the cost. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle in. The time has come for me to step back. I've always said that the true measure of a leader isn't in how far they can go themselves, but in how far they can take others. And I believe that this company is ready to move to the next level. It's time for new leadership to take us there. We've built this together, and now it's time for you to carry it forward. There was a silence in the room, but it wasn't a sad silence. It was a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had accomplished. My team understood. They knew this was the right decision. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me, for believing in this company, for sticking by my side through everything. This is only the beginning of what we can do. The future is in your hands now." I looked around the room, seeing the faces of the people who had helped me build this from nothing. They were ready. They were prepared to take the company to new heights, and I knew deep down that it was time to let go. As I walked out of the office that day, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had given everything to this company. I had poured my heart and soul into it, and now I was free. The sun was setting as I walked down the street, the golden light casting long shadows on the pavement. I had made it. I had built something meaningful, something that would outlast me, and I had done it on my own terms. I knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but I was ready. I had learned everything I needed to know about strength, about leadership, and about the importance of doing things the right way. I was ready to move on to embrace the next phase of my life. And as I looked out at the horizon, I realized something. The future had never felt so clear.